Torture chambers of Pelican Bay solitary confinement exposed. The cell block secret. The rain had already turned the coastal highway into a slick black ribbon when Detective Samuel Vance pulled his unmarked sedan off the road. The sound of the Pacific roared faintly beyond the fog, but ahead of him loomed a far more suffocating force, Pelican Bay State Prison. Its concrete walls, draped in razor wire, cut into the horizon like a scar. Inside those walls, men disappeared. Some by sentence, others by silence. Tonight, Vance was about to learn how deep that silence ran. 3 days earlier, a routine welfare check had spiraled into chaos. A local fisherman working near the Klamath River spotted something snagged against the logjam. At first glance, it looked like driftwood. Then he saw the hand. Swollen. Lifeless. When the coroner's team pulled the body onto the riverbank, they saw the wrists shredded by shackles. The ankles bore the same raw marks as if the victim had been chained for days. His eyes were open, but what horrified them most wasn't death. It was the look of pure terror frozen on his face. The man was identified as Luis Ortega, a former gang enforcer who had once been locked in the Security Housing Unit, or SHU, at Pelican Bay. Officially, Ortega had been released from prison 6 months earlier. Unofficially, he had vanished the moment he walked out the gate. No forwarding address, no contact with parole officers, nothing. Now he was floating in a river with the unmistakable stench of prison torture still clinging to his skin. Detective Vance knew the reputation of the SHU. Inmates called it the Box of Silence. A place where gang leaders were buried alive in concrete cells, cut off from the world. But Ortega's corpse told a darker story. This wasn't just isolation. This was restraint, starvation, maybe worse. Someone had turned solitary confinement into a personal dungeon. The deeper Vance dug, the stranger it got. Ortega's family swore he had been afraid to leave Crescent City, the small prison town that clung to Pelican Bay's shadow. He told his sister once in a hushed whisper, "They don't let you go. Even when you're free, you're not free." That same night, Vance requested Ortega's prison file. Hours later, he sat under the harsh glow of his office lamp, flipping through pages that smelled faintly of mildew. The official record painted Ortega as a violent man, a soldier for the Nuestra Familia gang. But then came the disciplinary notes. Months of solitary, repeated psychological evaluations, sudden transfers between cell blocks. And at the back, buried in the paperwork, was a sealed memorandum stamped classified, Internal Security Unit. The memo described an experimental program known only as Chamber Red. Ortega had been one of the first to enter it. The purpose was vague, behavioral correction through sensory manipulation. But there were redactions everywhere, thick black bars blotting out entire sentences. Still, one line managed to slip through: subjects will broken after extended exposure, complete compliance achieved. The next morning, Vance drove north. The prison loomed larger as he approached, the fog curling like smoke around the guard towers. Pelican Bay was supposed to be a fortress against chaos, but the closer he came, the more it felt like chaos was locked inside, festering. He was met by Warden Clark, a man with eyes as cold as the concrete behind him. Clark walked him through the administrative wing, his words clipped and rehearsed. Mr. Ortega was released according to schedule. What happened afterward is not our concern. But Vance wasn't here for rehearsed answers. He pressed harder. What's Chamber Red? For the first time, the warden hesitated. Just a flicker. Old paperwork. A pilot program from the 90s. Shut down decades ago. Yet when Vance studied Clark's face, he saw something the memo hadn't mentioned: fear. Later, during a quiet moment in the staff cafeteria, a correctional officer slid into the seat across from him. The man's uniform was pressed, but his hands trembled as he stirred his coffee. He leaned in close. "You're asking about the chambers. Don't." Vance kept his voice steady. "You know something." The officer's eyes darted around the room. "Some men, they don't come out the same. Some don't come out at all. We're told to keep the doors locked and the lights dim. We never see their faces, only hear them screaming. If they stop screaming..." He swallowed hard. "That's worse." When Vance asked him to explain, the officer pushed back from the table abruptly, leaving his coffee half full. "I've said too much. Watch your back, detective." That night, Vance returned to his motel and pinned Ortega's photo to the board above his desk. Around it, he arranged the fragments: the shackled body, the classified memo, the warden's hesitation, the guard's fear. A pattern was forming, one that pointed not outside the prison but deep inside it. Still, the real breakthrough came by accident. A janitor who had worked at Pelican Bay for 20 years contacted him anonymously. They met in the dark corner of a diner, the man's cap pulled low over his eyes. He spoke in a hushed voice. "There's a door at the end of D block. Not on the blueprints. You need a special key to open it. Behind it, that's where they keep the chambers." Vance pressed him. "What's inside?" The janitor shook his head. "I never went in. But I heard things. Chains dragging, men begging for water. One night I swear I heard drilling. Like someone was building something in there. The next day the corridor smelled like bleach." By now the detective's pulse was hammering. If Ortega had been part of Chamber Red, then maybe the program hadn't been shut down at all. Maybe it had evolved, hidden in plain sight inside the most feared prison in America. Armed with a forged pass and nerves of steel, Vance returned to Pelican Bay after midnight. The fog was thick, the guard towers shrouded, the compound eerily still. He slipped into D block, his footsteps echoing against the cinder block walls. At the end of the corridor he saw it, a steel door with no label, no handle, only a keypad lock. His heart pounded as he entered the code he'd lifted from the janitor's notes. The lock clicked. Slowly he pushed the door open. The smell hit him first. Damp concrete, rusted metal, and something else, something coppery and sour. The beam of his flashlight cut across the room. Chains hung from the ceiling. A chair, bolted to the floor, was fitted with leather restraints. Stains splattered the walls like ghosts that refused to leave. But it wasn't the chair that froze him, it was the wall of photographs tacked beside it. Dozens of mugshots. Men Ortega had served time with. Some listed as released. Others marked deceased. All had the same notation in red ink. Subject broken. And then, at the bottom corner he saw it, his own photograph. The flashlight trembled in his hand. Somehow they had known he was coming. The breaking point. The chill inside the chamber gripped Detective Vance like a fist. His eyes locked on the photograph of himself tacked to the wall, inked with the same red scrawl. Subject broken. He wasn't supposed to be here. He had crossed a line and someone inside Pelican Bay already knew it. The chains on the ceiling swayed gently, though no breeze moved in the room as if mocking him. He forced his breath to slow, snapping one photo after another with the burner phone he'd smuggled inside. But then came the sound. Footsteps. Heavy, measured, drawing closer down the corridor. Vance killed the flashlight and pressed his back against the damp wall. The steel door opened slowly, the faint light from the corridor slicing into the chamber. A silhouette stepped inside, broad shoulders, a correctional officer's uniform. The man's keys jingled at his side, his face hidden by the shadow. The officer walked straight to the chair, adjusting the restraints with a calm, practiced hand. He didn't look surprised. He didn't look nervous. It was routine, as if preparing for another night's session. Then he spoke, his voice low, rasped by cigarettes. "You're early." Vance's pulse spiked. He stayed perfectly still, the phone tight in his hand. The officer reached into his pocket and pulled out a syringe. Clear liquid shimmered under the light. He placed it on the chair's armrest, then pulled out a manila folder. Vance could see his own name written across the tab. He slipped out while the officer's back was turned, closing the door silently behind him. His heart slammed against his ribs as he hurried down the corridor, his mind racing. The chambers weren't abandoned, they were active. Ortega hadn't been the last victim. And now Vance wasn't just investigating, he was on the list. The next morning he sent the photographs to an encrypted server, then requested a private meeting with Ortega's sister, Marisol. She listened in silence, her face pale as he laid the images on the table between them. Her hands shook as she traced her brother's face in the photograph. "He told me," she whispered. "He said if I didn't hear from him, it meant they dragged him back." Her eyes filled with tears. "But I thought he was paranoid." "Who dragged him back?" Vance asked. She looked up, her gaze hard now. "The guards. Some of them. He said there's a unit inside that runs everything. Drugs, torture, fear. They don't answer to the warden. They answer to no one." That night, Vance returned to his motel to find his room ransacked. The mattress sliced open, the TV smashed, his notes scattered across the floor. On the cracked bathroom mirror, written in thick black marker, were two words: "Stop digging." But it was too late to stop. The next day, one of his sources, the trembling officer from the cafeteria, turned up dead. Official report: suicide. But when Vance studied the body, he saw the bruising around the wrists, the faint outline of restraints. Another message. Another warning. And still, one question gnawed at him. Who was orchestrating Chamber Red now? The answer came in the form of a phone call. An unlisted number. A voice he recognized instantly, Warden Clark. "You're in over your head, detective," Clark said coldly. "I don't know what you think you found, but you won't survive digging deeper. This place, it swallows men whole. You'll be no different." Vance clenched his jaw. "Then why call me?" There was silence, then a sigh. "Because once you've seen the chambers, you can't walk away. And because, whether you believe it or not, someone higher than me is watching you." The line went dead. 2 nights later, under cover of darkness, Vance broke into the prison again. This time, he wasn't looking for clues, he was looking for proof undeniable enough to expose everything. He slipped into the lower levels, following a maze of service tunnels the janitor had described. The deeper he went, the heavier the air became, thick with mildew and bleach. At the end of the tunnel, another steel door waited. Behind it came muffled voices, pleading, broken. He pushed inside. What he saw rooted him to the spot. Rows of cells, unmarked and hidden from any map. Inside, men sat chained to the walls, skin pale, eyes sunken, lips cracked. Some whispered to themselves, rocking slowly. Others flinched at the light, covering their faces. One lifted his head weakly, and Vance's stomach turned. It was a man listed as released 3 years earlier. The prisoners weren't criminals anymore, they were test subjects. A sudden clatter snapped him back. Guards appeared at the far end of the hall, flashlights slicing the darkness. Vance bolted, sprinting through the tunnels, his lungs burning, his ears ringing with the echo of shouting behind him. He burst into the open night, the cold coastal air cutting his skin. He didn't stop until he reached his car. 2 days later, Vance stood before a federal task force in Sacramento, photos and testimony laid out like a grim mosaic. The room was silent when he finished. The evidence was undeniable. Pelican Bay's chamber red had never ended. It had mutated into a covert program of psychological destruction, run by rogue officers hidden from oversight. But as the task force deliberated, an agent pulled him aside. His expression was grave. "Detective, we've been monitoring chatter. Someone leaked your identity. You're marked." And then came the final twist. 3 weeks later, while federal teams prepared to raid Pelican Bay, another body washed ashore. Shackled, starved, tortured. But this time it wasn't a gang member. It wasn't a released inmate. It was a federal investigator. The signature was the same. The chambers were still operating. The machine of silence was still grinding. And whoever ran it wasn't finished. They had shown Vance just enough to know the truth. Some prisons don't just hold criminals. They create them. They perfect them. The file closed. The photographs remained. And somewhere inside the walls of Pelican Bay, the screams continued.